Hi, Pat.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Hello, Craig Ann.
Hello.
I haven't heard from you in a long time.
Nope, I am majorly retired. Let's see, let me rename myself. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all.
Yeah.
I have to say that I did this presentation one other time, and it was about 3 weeks ago. And I thought, wow, the landscape is already changing. So after today, it's like, okay, I need to go back and do some revisions already to reflect how quickly things change on politically. So anyway, it's always interesting to know how fast things can happen. And certainly in the state legislature, that really happened. Sort of like, did I miss something in the last 10 minutes? Oh. Let's see.
Hey, Debbie.
Hey, how are you?
Good. I'm sure this will go great.
Well, I hope so. I was just saying, I already see, knowing what we know now that we didn't know even a month ago, that it's time for revisions already. So be sure to pop in. It's so interesting to realize that our knowledge keeps kind of evolving. But that's
Well, that's what good league work does.
exactly.
You revise. Yep. Well, I'm gonna go mute.
Okay. All right.
Hi, Madeline.
Hey, oh, good, you're here.
It's nice to be wanted.
If I was gonna have to do more than what I usually do, so this is great. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, so are you at home or are you up north?
Now I'm home right now,
Up north.
but I'm trapped in my bedroom. As you can see, I guess, you know, all my family is living here temporarily, and I have a real open landscape house. So the only way I can get away from noise and dogs and everything is to just come in my room and shut the door. So
I understand that.
I was tickled the other day to hear an interview with Stephen Colbert, who's been doing his show from home. But at one point, at least, his grown daughter was also working from home, and she came to his room and said, "Could you be a little quieter? I need to work." And so you realize, yeah, there's just no way to have every event happening at the same time in your house. So yeah, so we also know that sooner or later, my dog's going to come in and say that she really needs attention at this very moment. So we'll just see. So we still have about 5 minutes. That's over there.
Whoa.
Oops.
Go Zoom.
We'll give it a couple of minutes just to make sure everybody's on before we start, but thank you all for coming. Okay, we are welcoming everyone today to this hot topic event. It's spring outside, so thank you for taking the time to sit in front of your computers. Just a couple of notes. We've started our annual May membership drive, and that will last for the next couple of months, but we ask you to be on the alert for an email inviting you to renew your membership, or if you're not a member, to become one. And also on June 10th of this coming next month, is our annual membership meeting in which you will approve and vote on the League of Women Voters of Nashville new board, the budget, the strategic focus, and amended bylaws. So if you are a member, that email will be going out tomorrow morning. All the documents that we are going to present will be on that email, and we ask you to read them so that you can be ready to vote. At that meeting also, we're going to do a kind of self-introduction, so have something to say. And also we are going to announce the Molly Todd Award recipient. So we hope to make it a meaningful meeting. It will be June 10th at 5:30, still on Zoom, I'm sorry. And you will be sent the link once you register for the meeting. And so now I'll turn it over to Ethel, who will tell us what we're getting ready to hear. Ethel?
Thank you, Madeline. Just before we get started with today's speaker, I'd just like to let everyone know our June 4th speaker will be Katie Kaur, who is the president and CEO of the Nashville Public Education Foundation. They have been raising awareness about some issues with the state BEP, the education funding formula. And so she will be speaking with us about that on Zoom. So look for your link or look for information about that in your email. Before we get started, I'd ask everybody to please mute if you're not, and we'll be taking questions in the chat. So you can enter those in, and Debbie will be happy to address those at the end of her presentation. I think all of us know Debbie, but I actually, when I got her bio, found out things about her that I didn't know about her. So anyway, she is the newly elected president of the State League of Women Voters. She's previously served as vice president and state advocacy chair for the State League, and was our Nashville League's president for 6 years. She has more than 40 years of experience as an advocate for community engagement and quality public education, having served as the longtime executive director for the Nashville Public Education Foundation, as well as holding positions at Pencil Foundation, Peabody Research Institute at Vanderbilt, and the United Ways of Tennessee. She holds an undergraduate degree from Vanderbilt, as well as graduate degree from both the University of Manitoba and MTSU. So welcome, Debbie, as our speaker.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here and to be sort of a kickoff for this exciting event that we're going to be doing all year long, dealing with redistricting. So hopefully, if all goes well, I can share my screen. Whoops. And let me get to what I need to share. Oops. Now, hold on a second, I've got to pull it up. You know, I always feel like there's an easier way to do this, and I never feel like I know the fast way. So hold on a second. There we are. Okay, so I hope everybody can see that now. We okay? Okay, great. All right, so what we're going to talk about now is, let me get that out of the way, is a national outreach program that the League of Women Voters of the United States is doing in all 50 states, and it's called People Powered Fair Maps. And it has to do with redistricting. And we're going to talk today to really kind of give you the intro to it. And as I was saying to a few people before we started, one of the things that we are discovering is that our knowledge is evolving literally week by week about the whole process. And so this is really just an opportunity for you to get your first taste of what's going on. So redistricting, just to kind of remind you, is really something that happens every 10 years. And that what we end up doing is kind of having to rethink the whole process, because it's 10 years ago since we had to deal with it. And it feels like it should be a very orderly process. We start with a census count that occurs every 10 years. That data is sent to the states. The states review the data before map drawing process begins. District maps are drawn, maps are submitted for approval, new maps are implemented, and they go into effect for the next 10 years. And of course, what we know and what we've always known is it's never that smooth, particularly in Tennessee. And so we'll be talking both about it in general terms and then start to do a little bit of the dive into what it looks like in Tennessee. So again, you know, the point of the census, which is included in the Constitution, is that it will do three things for us. Is that it will define political boundaries, that's the redistricting process. It would determine the number of people that need to be reapportioned per district, and it needs to also serve as the guidelines for the way that federal dollars are reallocated to districts. So why should you care? What does it matter? Well, frankly, it's all about money and power. It's over $500 billion of federal money that is distributed by way of how things are reapportioned in redistricting. And the makeup of your representatives, literally at every single level of government, from the Metro School Board all the way up to your US Congress, is determined by the redistricting process. And of course, it also really functions because of the sanctity of the principle that we really hold dear, the principle of one person, one vote. And just as a reminder to everyone who's a League member in Nashville, Molly Todd, who was a longtime and beloved leader in the League of Women Voters of Nashville, was one of the plaintiffs in the 1962 case that went before the Supreme Court, the Baker v. Carr case that established the principle of one person, one vote. And I might add that the reason why it was brought up in Tennessee was that in 1962, the state legislature was still using the 1901 census figures for determining where the districts were. So it was an egregious issue. So, and the other reason why you should care about redistricting is just fundamentally the process isn't always fair. And that's something that should bother an organization like ours that is nonpartisan, but really is deeply embedded in the idea that government should be a functional process, and that voters should be able to choose who represents them, not the other way around, where our elected representatives are actually choosing who's voting for them. So we're going to begin by talking a little bit about redistricting's evil twin, gerrymandering. And probably a lot of you have heard of this before. The original abuse was done in 1812 by Massachusetts Governor Gerry. And it was a district that was so bizarrely stretched out that it was said to resemble a salamander. And there are a few characteristics that we think of as being a gerrymandered district. For one thing, it favors one political party over another, and it's not necessarily a Democratic tool or a Republican tool. It's whoever is in power might be doing it. And it minimizes the influence in an intentional way of minority communities. And because it determines what will happen over the next 10 years, it provides incumbents an unfair advantage going forward. So we might think of that as sort of something that was anachronistic from the 1800s, but I wanted to show you these three gerrymandered districts, which are current districts from 2010. And you can see that Maryland, Texas, Illinois, and Louisiana all had some really, really bizarrely shaped districts that sort of defy logical explanation and can only be explained as political gerrymandering. So I'm going to introduce you to two terms that you'll be hearing a lot about as we talk more about redistricting. And these are sort of two tools that are used in gerrymandering. One is called packing, and it concentrates like group of voters together to minimize their voting power. And if we look at this illustration, you'll see that there are the blues and the oranges. The blues have 11 voters, and the oranges have 14. So out of those 25, we all know who we think should be making the decisions, who has the most power, and that would be the 14 orange. But if we pack the districts together, and those blue politicians are really uncannily good at it, they were able to craft 5 districts that instead of giving the orange a majority, gave the blue a majority. So the blue in this case actually got 3 out of the 5 seats, even though logically we think they should only have gotten 2. So this is an example of packing. Cracking does something, also dilutes the voting power, but this process spreads out a party so that they don't have a majority in as many districts. And in this case, again, our wily politicians in the blue category, although they only have 11 houses to choose from out of the 25, they got 3 out of the 5 seats. So this is these tools are the strategies that help create gerrymandered districts and give future influence to one party over another. So, like any good league member, we'd have to ask, well, but aren't there laws against this? How do we protect ourselves? And the answer is that since 2010, when the last redistricting took place, there have been 2 decisions that have an influence that changed the landscape. So in 2013, in the case of Shelby County versus Holder, that was an Alabama case that went to the Supreme Court, it ended the concept of pre-clearance. It used to be that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 required that states or districts that had an egregious history of discrimination, of discriminatory voting practices, had to get pre-clearance of their election changes from the federal government. But in 2013, the Supreme Court said pre-clearance as it is currently stated is not appropriate. So essentially what they were saying is, you guys need to go, states have much more control than they did before. And so we certainly saw that there were a number of states like Georgia, Texas, Arizona, that made changes that they might not have been free to do beforehand. And I might add that Tennessee was never a state that was included in pre-clearance. And the other case that has really altered our political landscape in terms of redistricting is Rucho versus Common Cause in 2019 that was done in North Carolina. And you may have remembered reading about it at the time that there was very blatant political discrimination going on in terms of how redistricting was to take place. And it was not in the shadows. It was really pretty much in the open how it was being done. And the Supreme Court ruled at that time that they do not have the authority to interfere with partisan map making, that was a political decision that could take place in the states, and that their authority to consider redistricting was going to be limited specifically to racial gerrymandering. So this essentially means that in both cases that the states need to have much more free reign than they have in the past. So this doesn't mean that other states don't have requirements that we don't have. So just to give you an idea, at least 32 states hold public meetings to gather community input, and 26 states have redistricting hearings, and 33 states allow draft maps to be available. All these things, and we'll discuss them more as we go through, all those things exist in a patchwork of states. It's very much a state by state issue. And of course, there are some states that have the gold standard of having a nonpartisan process by having an independent redistricting commission, which we definitely do not have in Tennessee. So we'll talk more about some of these things later on and how they impact Tennessee. But just to let you get a sense that there are some deficits in Tennessee that other states don't have. So in general, the League of Women Voters in the United States has a general position statement on what redistricting should look like. And basically, here's the statement. It's the League of Women Voters supports redistricting process and enforceable standards that promote fair and effective representation at all levels of government with maximum opportunity for public participation. So it's a very general and broad statement that we will be working under as the League in Tennessee addresses these issues. And we will be doing it with multiple community partners, because this is clearly something that impacts people throughout the state and in a variety of situations. So the People Powered Fair Maps program, which is what the national agenda is designed to help expand fair representation of all people, to provide public input in the process, and to really be a national movement in all 50 states, regardless of where they're starting from, to really say there are ways to make it better in every state. So now we'll turn to redistricting in Tennessee and what it looks like. So in Tennessee, the state legislature is the entity that draws districts. And when I say draws districts, they are obligated to do three things. They have received the apportionment from the federal government, the Census Bureau, that says how many US congressional seats we have. And in the past, we've had that in 2010, we were allocated, there were 9 congressional seats appropriated, and we will continue to have that. They will be drawing the lines for those 9 congressional seats, for the 99 state House seats, and for the 33 state Senate seats. There are a few federal laws that they have to follow. They need to be close to equal population in the districts that they draw, and that they cannot intentionally dilute minority voting strength. And then there are a couple of state laws that guide redistricting, perhaps not as many as you would think. They call for connected and compact district drawing, and the governor can veto the map when it's finished. So, so again, just to let you know, just because things existed in the past with a certain way is never a guarantee that those maps will look the same as the new redistricting goes forward, because of course, population changes and it impacts things on all three levels. So what we know, for example, is that the congressional districts will each need to cover approximately 871 people. And again, there's that margin of error. So this is more than 62,000 more voters more individuals that are represented in each of the congressional districts than they were in 2010. And for the state representation for the Senate, they're each going to contain 10,500 more individuals, and for the House, 3,500 more individuals, approximately. So obviously, the lines that we know it cannot possibly remain the same. So what we do already know, and there was already some initial numbers that were released this last week to the states about population figures, just general population figures. And what we know, for example, is that the Memphis area is losing population compared to the rest of the state, and that Middle Tennessee area is growing in population. So we know that district lines have to change. So again, we have that concept of close to equal population. The margin of error ideally is plus or minus 5% between districts. And again, there's that concept of geographic unity. So it is substantially mandated by law, but it's often violated. So it has to be a single connected geographic unit. It needs to be reasonably shaped, which of course is in the eyes of the beholder. It needs to keep cities and counties together, which is something that we really believe is an important element that we want to see going forward, is to keep counties together. And we'll talk more about that, particularly in Davidson County later on. And it nests House districts inside Senate districts, and it needs to pass what we can refer to as the eyeball test. So when we see, for example, I'm looking at the state maps, the congressional district for congressional district number 3 is a bizarre straight shaped hourglass district that includes Oak Ridge at the top and Chattanooga at the bottom, and is very, 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 very narrowly connected in the middle. And so certainly any eyeball test on that would say, that doesn't look quite right. Obviously, there was some political gerrymandering going on to make that one happen. Preserving minority strength. Minority communities are mandated by federal law to have fair representation. That was in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And this really has to do with intentionality, not necessarily that every minority community will be elected, will have elected representatives, but that they need to, the district lines need to be drawn in a way where they could not arbitrarily be eliminated from any potential for ever having minority representation. But of course, as the United States has grown more diverse, the importance of this minority strength responsibility has evolved, because we have more minorities and we have them in different locations than we did in the past. And then another important factor that will be considered in doing districts is something that we're going to talk a lot about, not just today, but again, we have a webinar coming up on May 14th that will go into this in more depth, which is about respecting communities of interest. And this is sort of a nebulous concept in terms of redistricting. It's one of those things you know when you see it. But a community of interest essentially is saying that that individuals, that voters want to have someone who is going to do a good job of representing them because they understand that that the folks that they represent share some things in common that need to be connected. So it could be people who, a community of interest could be defined as people who share an economic, ethnic, or cultural interest. So for example, if we look at the map of Tennessee, we would say, really Oak Ridge and Knoxville should have been in the same congressional district because they are so interconnected economically in terms of where people work and who commutes from where, and that would be a logical link. Could be another way that we can define community of interest, of course, is where people live, work, pray, play. This can have more importance on a local level, but again, that connectivity matters. It could be systems they share. You want to know where your school districts are drawn because that could be something that really links a local community together. It could be resources. It could be where an electric power utility, its area that it services. And it could be benefits and hazards, it could be environment or jobs. And again, when we talk about communities of interest and what its impact could be, you can see how there could be concerns going forward. For example, if there are rumors, and they are certainly just rumors, that one of the possible ways that things could change in the future is that Davidson County could be split between congressional districts. And you can see that all these factors would come into play where if we were looking at Davidson County as a community of interest as a whole, all these factors would come into play and would say, we really need somebody who represents metropolitan Nashville in its entirety in order to address those needs. So another goal, which is one of the many ways that we have to balance how redistricting is done, is that theoretically they should be competitive districts. That is to avoid absolute, to minimize partisanship and the protection of incumbents. And we certainly see that sometimes where you see like a little U-turn on a redistricting map where you can see that an incumbent's house is just outside the boundaries and they have to go back and pull it in so that incumbent can run for that seat again. Theoretically, that's not supposed to happen. So there are a lot of competing factors on how redistricting is done. And frankly, it is impossible to have a pure system in real life, just because there are a lot of factors going on. We want to balance this issue of population equality within plus or minus 5% for all these districts. We want to make sure that minority voting strength is not diluted so much that it can't exist. We need to respect unbroken counties in Tennessee. Counties are considered the primary political subdivision, and by law, only 30 of the 95 counties can be divided between districts. And then again, there's that issue of compact districts. So there are a number of things that would ideally go into map making process that would ensure transparency, clarity, and participation, which of course is sort of what the League is always looking for, is how do we make government open and transparent, and how do we maximize public engagement? So ideally, if we could create everything, we would say we would like clear, prioritized, and ideally published criteria for how maps will take place and which are the most important considerations that map makers will be making. And we'd like to see, ideally, that there's political competitiveness and ethnic representation, and that we have rules that in advance would lead to negotiation and compromise as needed. and multiple and meaningful opportunities for public comment and involvement in the map making process with transparency and sufficient time so that if revisions need to be made, they actually could. And of course, adequate state funding for technical expertise. And of course, the gold standard that we would love to see happen in Tennessee, which is an independent, nonpartisan commission and not just the state legislature. And I might add that in Davidson County, one of the things that has worked well since Nashville merged governments with Davidson County was that the Metro Council districting lines are done by the Planning Commission and then presented to Metro Council for approval. So Metro Council has a very, very limited role in it. It's really done independently. And there has really been virtually no complaints about it over the years, really remarkably little. So, you know, again, we can see the advantage of having that kind of system in other locations. So now that we know what the ideal is, now we're going to see how does Tennessee do in comparison? And the answer is not so hot. In terms of public involvement, we are 40th among all states in terms of the openness of the process. At the moment, we know that Cameron Sexton, the Speaker of the House, will someday this summer, we don't know when, will appoint an ad hoc committee that will be in charge of drawing the maps, but we don't know any more about it than that at this point. And that we are one of 26 states where transparency is not statutorily or constitutionally required. And that zero announcements to hold public information or information sessions or receive public comments are required. And what we know from 2012, which is the last time we went through this process based on the 2010 census, was that there was no published criteria that the public saw. And there was a rush process in the state legislature where there were bills introduced with sort of fill in the blank to put in the census data. And literally the schedule from 2012 was that on January 4th, 2012, the House Ad Hoc Committee on Redistricting and the House State and Local Subcommittee meetings first saw the maps, the draft maps. And the final approval was January 13th. So between the 4th and the 13th was everything that happened in the state legislature. And even though there were requests for delays and there were requests for alternate plans, they really were all denied, including some amendments that people in the majority party wanted to make for the draft maps, and those were also basically ignored. And really, there was no meaningful public comment opportunity, which is hardly surprising given the fact the whole process took less than 10 days. So essentially, I think we can sum up what the league would like to say happen is none of the above. We would like to see really that these issues are resolved in a way going forward where we can really have a transparent, open process that allows way more opportunities for public engagement. So there are a number of things that we hope that we can do. And so it's really on two levels. I'll tell you that on the state level, and of course, the State League of Women Voters is rolling out the same program throughout the state, through all our local leagues, and trying to make this information available to as many different people and groups as possible, so everyone can sort of be on high alert. And we've already sent, on behalf of the State League, recommendations to Speaker Cameron Sexton, who will be appointing the ad hoc committee for redistricting. And we've requested to him that he consider giving recommendations to the committee on the way they should proceed. That would include expanding opportunities for public engagement, that would provide actively sharing information about the timeline and when opportunities for information is possible, and to host public meetings in the 3 grand divisions before the maps are drawn to solicit community input, and to use the same process that the General Assembly uses now in terms of providing opportunities for the public to see both in person what's happening in committee meetings, and also to see the virtual recordings that we now see in the state legislature, and to use those same things for the ad hoc committee as they move forward. And again, to provide the opportunities for public input on draft maps and for submission of additional maps, so that they could actually be incorporated into the draft revisions. So that's what we're doing as a state league. Those are our recommendations. What you can do individually is, first of all, promote the national HR1, SR1 congressional for the People Act that the US Congress is considering, and it's now in the Senate, which would really create some standardization around how redistricting is done, and would definitely create a much, can you say, much more level playing field? Can you say that? A level playing field, and or at least approximate a level playing field. Whoops, let me go back. That was too fast. And again, it would be great if we had legislation going forward that created a fairer map making process. There was legislation that was introduced this year, but did not make it out of committee, that would have created a fairer, more impartial process. And again, to push for a legislative guide that would clarify how the Tennessee Public Records Act and Open Meetings Act can apply to this redistricting process going forward. Again, demanding public involvement is going to be important. We need more open meetings on this. We need to know what's happening rather than find out, oh, it's too late, it's already done. And so we would encourage you all going forward to sort of have this on your radar, to demand public hearings and then to participate in them. That would be an important element. And then the next thing is something that you'll be hearing a lot more about, and that's how we define and protect your community of interest. What part of this will be to demand that the state legislature provides access to the maps and to the census and geographic data early on. We know that the census data will be released very late this year because of delays from the pandemic and also administrative delays in the past that really have created a time crunch. And we are very concerned that those will be used as excuses to make some of this information inaccessible. The census data is supposed to be received in September. By the census information will go to the states and they can start doing their map making then. And at least looking at the 2012 guidelines, that data needed to be finished and drawn into the draft maps in December, by the end of November. So we've got a very short timeline in that sense to provide information. We will be providing you a lot more information about how you can define your community of interest, both in terms of your storytelling about why certain areas, both even in the local areas in Davidson County, for example, or in the state maps, our districting maps, why they matter, and both storytelling about it, and we'll also be providing some easy map making tools that will help you find good ways to describe what it is going forward. And again, this is something, people just sort of tune out because they only see this every 10 years. And it's easy to have these opportunities pass by. So we'll be asking you to write or call your legislators about it, to send letters to the editor, to write op-ed pieces and post on social media. And particularly in Tennessee, where we have such strong rural urban splits, we'd also encourage you, if you have friends or relations who live in other parts of the state, we encourage you to make sure that they know about these issues and so they can talk to their legislators. This is not about changing who is in the majority party in the state and who's in the minority party in the state. It's about getting representatives who are able to address the needs of their constituents. So that is where we are on our people powered maps. We will have a webinar that is scheduled on, let me stop sharing there. We will have a webinar May 14th that is posted both on the Nashville League website and on the State League website. You can go ahead and register for that, and that's going to be May 14th, and we're going to be that's the next one in our series, and we'll be talking specifically about communities of interest with Dr. David Paget from TSU, who does GIS mapping that describes how you define communities of interest. So I am now ready if there happen to be any questions.
Well, actually there are. I guess our first question, Janet Schaus asked if you could repeat the numbers for the congressional districts. How many people in a congressional district?
Great. Okay. So according to, let me look it up here. Okay. So according to the new information, congressional districts will each need to cover 767,871 people. And this is an increase because of population increases to more than 62,750 people from what it was in 2010. And on the state Senate, it would be 10,500 more people. And on the Tennessee House, 3,500 more people in each district. And that means in particular, for example, that the Memphis district, congressional district for Senator Cohen is going to have to expand geographically to encompass more people, almost, I believe yes, he's going to have, that district is going to need to make the districts in Tennessee equal, the 9 districts. They'll need to add up to 68,000 more more individuals in his district. And Scott Desjardins' district, which is District 4, is going to have to shed 43,000 voters. So population shifts happen all the time, and they really do have consequences for how these things are handled.
Okay. Does Metro Nashville's process under the Planning Commission provide for transparency or public input? Is that required?
That is a good question. I do believe so, but one of the things, and I'm glad that question was asked, because one of our upcoming sessions is going to be specifically about Davidson County, and we're going to have someone from the Planning Commission actually come and talk about their process and can be more knowledgeable about it than I am. I'm not up to speed yet on that.
Okay.
Ethel,
Yes.
This is Stuart. I had put a little note in the chat about that question from Jack. If you'd like to hear from me about it.
Oh, yeah, I see your answer down there now. Go ahead, Stuart. Say
Well,
what
I
you
think this is correct. What I said was, yes, it does provide for it. I'm not totally sure if it is guaranteed by a local ordinance about openness and whatnot, but in practice, there have always been public meetings and public work sessions even where commissioners and members of the public informally discuss the lines and gather around maps and all of that. So there is, in practice, whether or not it's a metro ordinance or I don't think it's a state law. And the other thing about metro redistricting is, you know, as you explained, Debbie, it's never been controversial, and that's because the metro government founders wrote a charter that said the planning commission draws the lines. They're not the metro council. They draw these lines based on staff data, and the council has a right to reject that and pass their own. But then both of those maps go to the public in a required public vote. And every council has realized that they would lose that vote because of the well-placed skepticism people have about council members drawing their own lines. Just a little, I know that's not the focus of our thing, but on the metro level, it's a very different process than it is.
Reality. Okay, thank you, Stuart. What is the source of the rank of 40th you had on the slide, Debbie?
That was from the Brennan Center, which is a
Okay.
really good nonpartisan source for information and for people who really want to dig into the redistricting process and actually anything about election law. It's a really excellent source of information.
Okay. A couple of people have asked about the availability of this presentation. It is being recorded and it will be posted on the Nashville League's website. I think it's under the education tab maybe, but anyway, it'll be out there within a week or so, I'm sure, a few days.
And I might add that we're training a team of people to prepare to do this slide presentation to other groups, and we would be happy to have some volunteers who like to, get up to speed and be able to present it to other groups, because obviously you can imagine that there are a lot of people who are just going to be blindsided by all this.
Okay. Claire has asked, do non-citizens have to be counted equally in the numbers of those in each district?
Yes, so that's a good question. And you may recall that the census, that was one of the issues that held up the census, was a question of whether people who were not citizens would count in the census. But the census and that data is literally counts every individual. And one of the issues which is a side issue for Tennessee, is that there are some small, quite rural counties that have prisons in them. And the prison population is counted for their redistricting totals, even though, of course, people in the prison are not actually going to be participating in any government activity, so government sanctioned activity. So it's sort of like, yeah, you get the benefit of that population for redistricting purposes, but they're disenfranchised aside from that. So that's Tennessee's not the only state that does it, but it certainly creates some inequities.
Okay. Who sponsored the fair map making this year?
Senator Jeff Yarborough, who's a Davidson County Senator, was the one who spearheaded that, and it died in its first committee hearing.
Okay. What's the date by which redistricting must be completed?
The deadline is, let me think if I'm going to get this straight. The deadline is so the redistricting has to be done in 2022 so that people can run in primaries that spring. And if you think about it, those lines already have to be in place by then in order for that to happen. There actually was some state legislation which essentially said that for some local government entities, that they actually had a little bit of a grace period this year if they couldn't get a local districts drawn in time. That won't affect us in Davidson County since we have a planning commission that can focus on that.
Okay. Will the release of the data be publicly known or announced?
So, the first time that we will hear about what the maps look like, actually see the draft maps that the ad hoc committee has prepared, is going to be in January. And again, if that timeline works the same, it'll be like a 10-day period before it's approved.
Okay. Stuart, I see your, is that the comment? Is this a different comment?
I think I threw my comments in together, but I did want to mention, in addition to Senator Yarborough, the House sponsor was Vince Dixie, who's a national state representative of the Fair Maps things.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification, Stuart.
Oh, here's an interesting question. Why is this process, the meetings, the committee, not necessarily covered under the open meeting regulations?
Isn't that a good question?
Yes.
So this is one of the things that I really think that public pressure makes a difference. And frankly, what we know in general is that demands for public transparency and for that is what helps motivate it, more of it. So, we're going to be working really hard at this, but it's going to take a lot of effort over a lot of months, and it's going to be really easy to be diverted and to have our attention look in other ways while this is going on. So we've got to stay on top of this.
Okay. Erwin has made a kind of a statement question here about whether or not the concept of a fair or open process for redistricting could be accomplished through litigation.
That's a good question, and it is possible. One of the things that unfortunately happens is that it's hard for some of these things to happen on the front end. It's almost like redistricting has to be done wrong in order for us to correct it. And, obviously, whenever you can do things proactively, it's better. But yes, there certainly, I think there are a number of entities that are already looking at litigation as a possibility. And certainly in other states, the League of Women Voters has been a litigant in some redistricting issues.
Okay. There's another question here about the required population changes for each congressional district. I'm assuming there would be several of those. I guess you said 68,000 more for number 9 and 43,000 less for number 4. So I guess, are those published in some place, or?
That was information that was extrapolated from the information that the census sent out to the state just this, I guess it was last week at the end of April. So yeah, that information is public. So those aren't the only districts that are changed. It just, that gives you a sense of everything's in flux. And obviously, as with any map making, you can't change one boundary without a lot of boundaries changing.
Tracy Depp has clarified that the recordings are under blog on the LWVN website, which is correcting me. I stated the wrong thing. So thank you, Tracy, for that. Who at the legislature will do the actual work on the maps? Current staff?
So there is Cameron Sexton will be appointing an ad hoc committee, but obviously there's staff that's going to be actually working with the technical part of it. And for those of you all who were part of the state convention, we heard from Doug Himes, who is the ethics counsel for Cameron Sexton, and he's the providing a lot of that overview and the connecting piece. And so, yeah, there is, there's technical people who are going to be working on maps, not just the legislators, but we actually, we don't have names of anybody beyond Doug Himes at this point.
I would add, because I worked there so long, that the state controller's office does provide staff assistance, not as much for the legislative districts, but they do work quite a bit with the county commission districts and the local redistricting. And I guess I had some involvement in that several years ago. So they do try to provide, I think, pretty much fair, nonpartisan, accurate work to the extent that they can. I guess I had a question, Debbie, and that is, is there a coalition of organizations that are all working, or that are all interested on this, that perhaps could be more pressure brought to bear as a coalition of groups, or part of a coalition of groups, or are we primarily it? I don't know.
No, there actually are other groups, and on the state level, we've had a team that's working on this. The current vice president for the state league, Marianne Reeves, has been heading this up in terms of getting the information out now. But we've been working with a number of groups, such as Civic Tennessee is one of them, a number of groups that are nonpartisan, that really care about these issues, because it's really a collective voice that matters on this. And so expanding that group is something that we really want to do, and we certainly welcome additional partners.
Okay. We've got 3 minutes. Anybody else have another question?
Well, this is Stuart again. I seem to be very talkative today. I guess it's the coffee, or maybe it's because I talk a lot. But about Erwin's question, obviously it's correct that we don't have access to the working process of how they look at this as they're writing the lines. But like any other bill, it is subject to open meetings. And the actual, once the bill is developed, same as in any other bill, you don't have any right under Tennessee law, at least, to kind of meet with legislators and staffers who are thinking about what they might want to propose. But all of that, once it's filed, it's of course part of the state's open meetings, open government process. It's just that it's pretty much a rubber stamp by then. But so they can say legitimately that, oh, we're going to have an open process, and that we're going to present the plan and have people ask questions about it and all of this. But as you might expect, and has always been the case, whatever party was in power gets it in a closed room and decides where best to benefit their party. And we don't get to see those meetings.
Right.
Just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, thank you. And there's something, and let me just clarify a little bit about the map making, because it's really going to be on 2 levels that you can be engaged if this is something that interests you. For people who really are ready to get embedded in the map making process, one of our organizational partners, Civic Tennessee, is conducting some training on how to do maps that could be submitted to the state, potentially for consideration. And if you want training, if you can let me know, and we will, I'm sorry, I didn't bring the link for it right now, but if you let me know, I'll make sure that you find out about it. Their next training is later this month. It's a multi-day training, and it's really for people who really are ready to do real maps. And so it's good training, and people who've gone through it have found it very helpful. But in addition, we will also be having sessions where we demonstrate a very user-friendly kind of, which we say an informal kind of map making, where literally you don't need the instruction book. You can just be shown how to do it. And what it will do is it will help you figure out how you can describe what we've been talking about in terms of communities of interest. So that's really, what should we say, that's the democratic one that everybody's going to be able to do, because it's not difficult at all. But if you'd like this, the real training for the more serious map making, let me know, and we'll be happy to do that.
Okay, I realize people put in more questions. Well, there's one more here. Is the process used in 2012 the same as previous processes, which would show a pattern in practice about redistricting?
Well, we don't really know the process right now. We have, that's actually part of it. We don't have a timetable. It's never been announced. We don't know exactly who's involved. We're just assuming that what we've seen in the past is what we'll see in the future, unless we make changes, unless we push for changes.
Okay. I'm thinking that the website for the National Conference of State Legislatures probably has quite a bit of information about redistricting in all of the states and what's the same and different. I know they used to have extensive workshops at their conventions about it. So that might be another resource people would like to check out. Anyway, I think we're out of time. This was great information, and we appreciate your hard work on it, Debbie. And we thank you very much. So
Great.
next month.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Debbie.
Mhm.
Debbie,
Hey.
you are a natural.
Oh, well, thank you.
Every time I hear you present something, you do it. Joey's yelling in the background. You were great.
Oh, well, thank you. That's really sweet of you all to say that. I appreciate it.
Very. I wrote you a little note about doing something for our newsletter for the roundtable, but
Okay.
we'll
I
check.
will. Okay.
Thank you for this job. Well
All right.
done. Bye.
Great.
Debbie, I agree. It was fabulous.
Oh, good.
It really, I love the way you described those two orange blue house things. You did a very good job.
Oh, good, good. But you can see that we already need to make some changes. Like, we need to make sure that in every presentation, we said we've already reached out to Cameron Sexton.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, anyway, yeah. So, but I guess we also need to think about when we want to do a presentation about let me turn off the recording.
Yeah.